Welcome back. Darling, the fantasy you're about to hear gets very intimate. To hear the full extended ending and see the private artwork, unlock my Patreon using the link below. Now, close your eyes.
You are no longer a weapon, Samuel, so stop trying to feel like one. The doctor's voice echoed in the sterile, violently bright air of the military hospital room, hanging over me like a death sentence. It was a command that bypassed the thick muscle and bone of my skull, burying itself deep into my heavily medicated brain. I stood alone. It was the first time since the bandages had been unspooled, since the numb, morphine-soaked haze had finally begun to lift from my senses. The floor tiles were biting cold beneath my bare, heavily calloused feet. These were the feet of a predator, an apex machine built to stalk through sandstorms and kick down reinforced steel doors. But right now they felt entirely numb, disconnected from the floor, from reality, from the man I used to be. I dragged my gaze upward, millimeter by agonizing, terrifying millimeter, confronting the towering, full-length mirror they had so cruelly left in the corner. The man staring back at me was a ghost inhabiting a tank. I used to be a behemoth, a hardened force of nature. Guys in my unit used to say I was broad-shouldered, merciless, carrying a perpetual, simmering rage beneath an impossibly thick hide of muscle. I was a man you did not cross. I was aggressive, hair-trigger violent, my veins constantly pumping with the sharp, acidic liquid fire of pure adrenaline and high testosterone. Now, my eyes moved downward, dragging past the familiar terrain of shrapnel scars crisscrossing my thick chest, past the dense slabs of my abdominals, until I reached the epicenter of my destruction. A smooth, terribly quiet canvas where the very core of my identity used to exist. The IED had flashed in the desert, a brilliant, blinding rip of white heat, and then suffocating darkness, and it had stolen the fire that defined me. The damage is entirely absolute. Your baseline is 0. The doctor's grim prognosis looped in my fractured mind, skipping like a broken record over the hollow silence of my heartbeat. This was not merely a physical injury. The horrifying transformation was entirely endocrine, terrifyingly psychological. The blast had severed my connection to the roaring, chemical engine that had driven me my entire life. I stood there staring at the heavy, thick meat of my arms and chest, realizing with a sickening cold wave of despair that there was absolutely no drive left in my blood. Before the blast, my skin was constantly tight, humming with aggressive, possessive energy. Now my body was quiet, breathtakingly, suffocatingly quiet. I was a bull turned into a docile, heavy beast of burden. The towering musculature felt utterly useless, a heavy, passive cage of meat that I didn't know how to pilot anymore. I reached inside myself, trying to summon the roaring fury that had always protected me, but there was nothing. My raw, predatory hunger had dropped to absolute 0. The alpha was dead. I was nothing. Weeks bled into a formless, gray smear in an isolated apartment where the blinds were perpetually drawn. Without testosterone, the world lacked edges, everything was flat, safe, but entirely meaningless. Then, the phone rang. The new doctor's voice was clipped, professional, presenting an entirely different path. An experimental pill, a chemical cocktail that had never been fully authorized. The suppression has fully set in, the doctor murmured through the receiver, his voice weaving an insidious web around my apathetic brain. The canvas is completely blank. If you take this, you are rolling the dice, Samuel. We don't fully know what the chemical will overwrite you with. The old Samuel, the tactical, combat-ready commander would have coldly calculated the terrified odds and walked away. But I didn't even pause. There was absolutely nothing left inside me to protect. The towering ego, the fierce pride, the unyielding defensive instincts of the alpha male had been chemically annihilated. Send it. I breathed into the phone, my voice raspy, detached. I didn't care about the complications. I just wanted the profound, suffocating silence in my head to end. 2 months. It had been exactly 2 months of absolute 0 testosterone purgatory. I sat at the small, dusty kitchen table, staring at the little blister pack they had sent by courier. A single pill. I swallowed it without water. It scraped agonizingly down my dry throat, a harsh, tiny intrusion into the massive void of my body. I sat perfectly still, my massive hands resting palms down on my thick thighs. At first, nothing happened. just the suffocating ticking of the wall clock. And then something inside me shattered. It wasn't a physical pop. It was a massive, seismic explosion at the microscopic, cellular level. It wasn't the return of my strength. No, the heavy, dominant alpha strength was utterly gone, replaced by an overwhelming tidal wave of terrifying vulnerability. It felt as if every single strand of my DNA was being violently, relentlessly rewritten. My heart spiked abruptly, slamming against my ribs with frantic, trembling beats, but it wasn't the booming war drums of battle adrenaline. This was a chaotic, fluttering pulse of sheer, unadulterated panic. I was a frightened animal trapped in headlights. A profound, alien heat bloomed in the dead center of my chest, flushing out through my heavy veins like liquid mercury. It wasn't the sharp, acidic heat of rage that I used to know so well. This heat was sweet, cloying, devastatingly thick and heavy. It melted through my muscles, dissolving the dense, combat-ready knots in my shoulders and back, forcing a heavy, lethargic weakness to pool deep within my marrow. I gasped, my lips parting helplessly as my nervous system suffered a catastrophic breakdown. Suddenly, the world was too loud, too bright, too close. My skin became instantaneously, agonizingly hypersensitive. The thick cotton of my simple t-shirt suddenly felt like a heavy, abrasive grit rubbing against my newly tenderizing flesh. A phantom breeze from the cracked window drifted over my exposed forearms, and it felt like hundreds of phantom, delicate fingers caressing my skin, causing my breath to hitch wildly in my throat. No, no, no! Maintain discipline! Lock it down! The military remnants of my brain screamed. I tried to brace my core, tried to build an impenetrable perimeter of pure male ego, but I couldn't. The walls of my masculinity were made of wax, and this pill was an inferno. The heat was traveling downward now, rushing past the hollow cavity of my stomach. An excruciatingly strange, terrifying sensation began to bloom at my core, a heavy, melting ache that forced my thick thighs to press instinctively together, trembling uncontrollably. It wasn't the hard, aggressive tension of the man I used to be. It was entirely internal, an incredibly deep, yielding surrender, as if my very nature was softening, breaking down, longing to be utterly consumed. Oh God, what is happening to me, I thought, my mind fracturing as a hot, humiliating tear slipped completely unbidden down my cheek. I shouldn't feel like this. I shouldn't be melting into the chair like a desperate, terrified mess. I dragged my massive, shaking hands over my face, letting out wet, pathetic, breathy pants. I felt so unbelievably wide open, so shockingly exposed. The predatory aura I had worn like a second skin for 40 years was just gone. As I sat there, gripping the edge of the kitchen table, a profoundly terrifying, yet sickeningly euphoric realization cemented itself in my shattering mind. I was not the hunter anymore, and for the first time in my life, I felt the terrifying, submissive, heart-pounding terror of being prey. The pill was stripping the last, lingering ghosts of the soldier away, leaving something far softer, far more desperate, and far more deeply craving behind. The devastating surge eventually began to ebb, but it left the shores of my body permanently altered. I had collapsed, slipping right out of the chair and onto the cold linoleum floor of the kitchen, lying completely motionless in a pool of moonlight. My massive chest rose and fell in ragged, erratic, shallow little pants. The initial, explosive fire had passed, but something terrifyingly fundamental had shifted. The experimental chemistry had firmly embedded itself, sinking its intoxicating teeth into my system. I felt impossibly lighter, yet paradoxically, far more pinned down. My muscles, though still large, felt uncharacteristically soft, lacking the spring-loaded tension that had defined my posture for decades. My thoughts moved slower, fuzzier, like moving through a thick, sweet syrup. And for the first time since the explosion, I realized I was no longer fighting. My legs shifted slightly on the cold floor, the muscles of my thighs feeling strangely hypersensitive. My back was arched just a fraction too much, settling into a naturally pliant, deeply submissive curve. There was a heavy, sweet ache throbbing steadily within me, a promise of profound physiological transformations yet to come. A body that would slowly alter under the hormonal assault, nerves that ached to be dominated, a mind that was already eagerly throwing down its weapons, longing to be guided. I closed my eyes. A long, incredibly shaky, desperately submissive breath escaping my parted lips. I was drowning in the warm, narcotic dark of this new reality. The resistance was entirely gone. I wasn't an alpha anymore. I was nothing but a breathless vessel. I just lay there, vulnerable, exposed, entirely consumed by the echoing command that I had completely surrendered to, waiting for whatever this drug would make me next. The story doesn't end here. Things are about to get a lot more feminine. Unlock the uncensored chapter on my Patreon, link in description and pinned comment,